Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, between moving house and catching that thing that's been going around, that thing I can't mention for fear of demonetization, I've been pretty busy, hence my non-existent upload schedule. I'm what medical professionals would call fat, so finishing sentences over the last fortnight without requiring emergency oxygen has been pretty difficult, but now that I'm better, almost, I wanted to get back to what I love doing, and that is making videos, of course. I've been playing a lot of Cyberpunk 2077 recently, and this December marks a year since its release. I said from launch that I wanted to follow the progress of this title because many felt that it wasn't exactly a finished product, especially if you bought it for the PS4 or Xbox One. Of course, my platform of choice is the PC, where the Cyberpunk experience has definitely been a lot better over the last 12 months. You may have seen a lot of Cyberpunk 1 year videos recently, I know I have, and I've enjoyed the many different takes and opinions about the game's changes and fixes. For my video though, I wanted to focus on the performance. How have things changed from a lower end perspective as far as the game's playability is concerned? Because if there was one thing that this game didn't really like at launch, it was lower end hardware. Have the patches also affected the frame rate figures so far? Well, 2022 will likely mark a significant year for Cyberpunk as we finally get the next gen update for consoles, and I've no doubt that PC performance will be affected by this as well. But as it stands, and as we approach the end of this dumpster fire of a year, Cyberpunk is currently sitting at version 1.31, the same as it's been since September. What I thought I'd do then is compare the game's current performance to that of 1.04 and 1.05, which are two early versions that I still have benchmark data for. I think these hotfixes came out a day or two after the game's release, at least 1.04 did, and I think 1.05 came out about 2 weeks later. Now our focus today, as I previously mentioned, is lower end hardware, so let's start at the lowest of the low and talk about the Athlon 3000G. Now, it's no secret that the 3000G will struggle to play this game. It's a 2-core, 4-threaded CPU with integrated Radeon graphics and hitting somewhere between 30 and 40 FPS at 720p low with 50% resolution scale is the best we can hope for. Still, despite the eye-watering visuals, and not in a good way here, the result is still surprising because this chip once cost about £40, which is less than the game itself. It costs a bit more than that these days thanks to the shortage of everything, but there we go. Now back in 2020 the percentile figures were worse, indicating more frame dips and stutters here and there. The on-screen footage is from the latest version of the game, but I'll throw up some comparative figures to the early version as well, of course. Performance is better with nothing but the 3000G these days, with less stutter and frame dips, but the biggest difference is that the game actually loads. See, last year, up until about patch 1.05, which wasn't too long after launch, the game wouldn't load with dual-core CPUs. Every time I wanted to load a save file, it would crash. And while this could be fixed by starting a new game, it wasn't only inconvenient, but the game would soon crash anyway after a short period of playing. Thankfully, these days you can load your save games just fine and play for as long as you like, providing you can put up with the often sub 30 FPS frame rate, that is. Switching to some city gameplay and performance doesn't really change here between 1.04 and 1.31, but again the latest version is crash free. I noticed a weird graphical glitch that quickly went away, and the 1% low was actually a little worse this time around, but at least we can play the game without a sudden black screen and a crash to the desktop. The 3000G can only do so much though. With the dual-core fix sure to have erased the frustration of many budget PC gamers, it's time to add a GPU to this equation. The 1050 Ti is more expensive now than it was this time last year, but the good news is that if you were to pair one with an Athlon 3000G for whatever reason, then you'd be getting an even better frame rate this December than you would have after patch 1.05 last year. We're still limited to 720p, but this time we can utilise full resolution scaling, and while 39 FPS doesn't sound too bad, the obvious CPU bottleneck is still present, as are the frame dips and stutters, which are just as bad as they were last year, perhaps a little bit more so in fact, but it's no surprise considering that the CPU is just begging for me to remove it from the system. It's surprising what it can do, but if it were a living thing it would probably be asking me to quit the game right about now. Outside of the game, there have been changes to the world of graphics card support as well. The GTX 760 got its last ever drivers this year, and while this doesn't make any differences here because the game came out before GPU support ended, it'll be interesting to see how next year's game changes affect things with this card. In combination with my trusty Core i5-10400F, the 2GB GTX 760 does a little better than it did a year ago, again compared to the early 1.04 version of the game. It seems as though performance on lower end hardware hasn't changed significantly, but improved frame times with some hardware is a welcome change, especially if you're using an APU. And outside of dual core CPUs, between 1.04 and 1.05, I should also mention that performance was pretty much identical there as well. The fact that we've seen better support for 2-core CPUs over the last 12 months is good because, believe it or not, there are still some gamers out there who are still trying to squeeze every last drop of performance out of their Athlon or Pentium. As I mentioned before, I like Cyberpunk 2077. I have done since launch, at least on PC. I spend a lot of time just exploring the city and the desert, and I think in terms of atmosphere and the world that's been created, it's a great game that still has a lot of potential. I do wonder how lower end processors and graphics cards will be affected by the upcoming patches that we'll see through 2022, but I'll be sure to continue benchmarking this title with various hardware, and perhaps I'll reassemble the minimum requirements machine if I can find another GTX 780, which by the way is also unsupported these days thanks to its last driver update coming out a month or so ago now. But there we are, Cyberpunk 2077, 1 year later from a performance standpoint, and with lower end hardware, there are certainly some noticeable frame rate changes here and there, but I think it's with the frame times that most differences occur, even if it doesn't always work out to be a more positive conclusion this time around. The 3000G is still quite impressive, and I'm glad that it can still load the game. I'm even more glad that it can actually load previous save games now, because during this time of graphics card shortages, you might find yourself picking one of these up if you're on an extremely tight budget and want to pair it with something like a GT 1030 later down the line, but can't find one at the moment. Thank you very much for watching this video. Hopefully my schedule will be a bit more back to normal now, because over the last couple of weeks I've basically uploaded nothing at all, and yeah, hopefully then, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it down below, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I will be back very soon with another video. I'm not sure what we'll be talking about yet, but I'll be back sooner than 2 weeks, put it that way. Thank you, and I'll see you then.